So again, thank you for joining in Parenting in This Wild New World. And now I'm going to hand it off to our presenter, Julika von Stackelberg, who is a certified parenting coach at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Orange County.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It is a delight to be here with you all in this virtual space, and I hope that, as you all, I am learning too to utilize all of the features and that are available to us, so we're all hopefully bearing with each other, and you all with me as well. So it is wonderful to be here and to talk to you about parenting in this wild new world. I am going to jump right in, except that I will ask Joanna one quick question. We're closing at 12:15, is that correct?
I think 12 o'clock, but I always just give a little bit of extra time.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Just so that I know, because I want to be mindful of that and let you all go on time. Okay, so parenting in this wild new world. Today we'll talk about some tools for connection and cooperation between adults and children. And so as we're doing this, what we're going to look at today, whoopsie daisy, now why is this not moving? Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So I will briefly introduce to you Cornell Cooperative Extension. We do a lot of different programs in Orange County as well as in other counties, but I represent Orange County, which includes agricultural support, so supporting our farmers with research that they can apply in their fields, as well as horticulturists. We also run the 4-H programs in the state of New York are hosted through the Cornell Cooperative Extensions. And then we have our Family and Consumer Sciences area, which is where I'm at. And here is where we're really talking about raising kids, eating right, and spending smart. So we have parenting programs and relative as parent programs for anyone who raises children that are not biologically their own, but who are related. Most of the times it's grandparents, but sometimes also great-grandparents or aunts, uncles, sometimes siblings. So for those families, we have a lot of supports and programming available. And then our nutrition programs and financial management. And I know that many of these are also hosted and advertised and collaborated with through the library system. So it's wonderful to be here to talk to you all. Before we begin, I wonder if you could type in the chat if you are currently actively parenting a child. And, let's just put ages 0 to 20, and maybe you could just put that in the chat as yes or no. This way I get an indication, because I would love to be able to speak to you all in terms of, making it realistic and relevant, whether it's professionally or more personally. So if you wouldn't mind to just type that in the chat, then I see this. Okay. Yes, no, yes, no. Thank you for responding and utilizing the feature. Perfect. And the ages, thank you for putting those in too. Okay, great. So it seems we have a mix here, and this means that I will talk to you about the tools here in a way that is applicable in a professional capacity as well as in a parenting, whether you're the a caregiver or parent of a child. Okay, so the question is oftentimes, right, how would you like to go to bed at night feeling great about your day? Right, so we all would love to go to bed feeling that we had loving and warm interactions with our children or the children in our lives, or maybe our partners or other family members who we're interacting with. And so especially now that we're all so close together, if we are interacting with family members, we of course would want to go to bed feeling good about those, right? And so, yes, we want to also feel accomplished about our day and, have this feeling of, hooray, I did something. And The thing though is, and I have to tell you, this presentation is one that this class, this workshop is one that we run all the time. So at that time, we would talk about the fact that stress is up, and that most Americans report that their stress is moderate or even to a high degree. And so, and the fact is, as we know, stress affects our health, it affects our productivity, our relationships, and how we experience our lives. And so, this is pre-pandemic, and so now post-pandemic or in pandemic, obviously there's a lot more that goes into this. So needless to say, there are varying factors, right? So before, one of the big stressors for families raising children is, social media and the constant bombardment of information, right? So, and now this is no different, and it might have actually increased, that we're experiencing COVID-19. So really, the fact is that these stressors are there and they're impacting us. And in our last presentation, we talked about ways that we can stay in our resilience zone. And while these, strategies may seem simple, they really are. There isn't a magic pill. And I promise you too, for parenting and relationship building, there isn't a magic pill. And so what we really need to look at is, focusing on doing these very simple things in order to stay in that kind of a zone where we're able to reduce our levels of stress. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too in a different context. But here's an overview. So today we'll talk about identifying what are your unique family or your personal values. We'll talk to you about what do you think, is important to you. You can think about that. We'll have a quick exercise. We'll provide you with a new understanding or clarity around parenting skills, hopefully. In our parenting classes, we always talk about, we're not here to tell anyone how to parent, and how to raise children or how to work with children, because, especially with our own children, we really know we're the experts in their lives. We know our children. We know what helps them, what's good for them. So there, some outsider coming in telling any of us what to do is really not what we're here to do. What we're here to do, however, is to provide tools. And so, like in your toolbox at home, you have a hammer and a saw and pliers and, if you're missing a tool that you need for a specific, project or something that you want to do, then, sometimes you have to improvise. So, and it's the same with our parenting programs. We're really here to provide additional tools to your toolbox to raising children or working with children. And so that's what I'm hoping you will walk away with too. And in that, we'll offer some kind of a sequence of steps. I think we live in a world that oftentimes likes to say, here are the 5 steps to your solving your issue forever. So no, I am not here to give you those 5 steps. I am sorry. However, these 5 steps that are there are really there to help building connections with those in our lives who are important to us. Okay, so we will begin by looking at your parenting style. And I want to say that please put in the chat box if you have any questions there. Joanna is helping to monitor that, and I invite you to shout at me, Joanna, if there is something urgent that I may be missing here. So, discovering your parenting or leadership or teaching style is something that, I want to talk about for a moment here. So, if we look at research, we can find that there are 3 distinct styles, and the 3 distinct styles have been, identified by different researchers, and some identify 4 or 5 or even 6. But if you all boil it down, it comes to these 3 sort of pillars, or not actually, sorry, they're not pillars, these 3 styles really that can be identified. And so within that, there is a lot of variety, of course. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I do want to sort of point these out. So one is so-called brick wall parenting. And, if we're asking, like, what does a typical brick wall parent say? And it's, a sentence like, because I said so. You do that because I'm the adult and you're the child and you listen to me and that's it. So there's a fast stop, there's no movement, there is, if you touch a brick wall, it's hard, it might be cold, unless the sun shone on it, but it's unforgiving. It basically is just there, unbendable. And so that's kind of the, on the extreme end. And then on the other extreme end, we have what is called jellyfish parenting, and I can just see that my H here slipped away. Maybe that's indicative of the jellyfish style, but really what that means is, so jellyfish parenting, is kind of flip-flopping and, like, oh, whatever is something that, a jellyfish parent might say. So that's sort of the opposite, right? It's soft, it's just, airy-fairy to some degree. And then in the middle really is, or the next part is really sort of the backbone parenting, right? So if you look at your own backbone and you're turning and your body and you're twisting, or if you were to bend over, it bends. It's flexible and structured, so at the same time. If we look at this in a different picture here, right, then you see that brick wall parenting is also considered authoritarian parenting. So being like an authoritarian parent is that kind of a parenting style. And on the one extreme, that is what could be used or named abuse, right? So if you are not responding to a child, or if you are, like a really hard, punishing your children or physically abusing children, that would fall into that category, because the child's needs and behaviors and the reasons behind the behavior may not be taken into consideration, right? And so, and again, on the other end, when you have a parent who is extremely permissive, that would be considered neglectful, not seeing this. And, on either end, you could ask, would a child feel loved by a parent who's either, brick wall or jellyfish? And you could say, maybe brick wall, yeah. I mean, maybe the child feels love to a degree. However, they may not feel seen. They may not feel heard. They may not feel they have a voice. They may not feel safe with the parent they can't come to, because that parent might just, blow out of proportion, or if you're always walking on eggshells not to upset that person. So that's where sort of the dynamics of power and control often take over, right? And so that's on this end of the spectrum. Whereas on the other end, someone who's permissive, or who doesn't have any structure in that sense, might also not come across as a reliable parent to a child, because the child doesn't know if the parent will get up and do something about the problem, or, talk to the teacher if there's an issue, or speak up for the child if they want something. So that's these extremes. And in the middle, the democratic parenting, that backbone parenting, is really the kind of parenting where the child has a voice. It doesn't mean the child makes all the decisions, but they have a voice. They have a space and a place, and to give their input and to be heard and to feel seen. And while at the same time, the parent or caregiver provides some kind of structure and firmness for the child that is within this range, right? Sometimes you have to be very strict or firm, with a child when it's about safety issues, for example. On the other hand, you might be able to be a little bit more flexible if your child is growing older and showing responsibility, or, if you're in a pandemic, So you might have to have some of this, but if you're looking at this, circle around the democratic parenting style, that's really where we want to be. And so the thing is that when we get to like these edges of the green zone, so to speak, which, in our last webinar, we called that the resilience zone. If we get out of our resilience zone, where we're able to respond to our children, or children we're working with, but we're more reacting and not taking the reasons behind their behaviors or their opinions or the wants or desires, their needs and feelings into consideration, then it's most of the times because something is going on in our own lives that pushes us out of this resilience zone where we're able to respond. So this is where we go to the points that, we say, okay, what are we going to do to get ourselves back into that zone? So sometimes that means, finding a place to cool down, taking a walk, walking away from a situation, washing our hands, or, finding some other, physical stimulation, some sensations in our body that we're able to, come back online, so to speak. Sometimes it may be making sure we get enough rest, going to bed on time, putting the screens away, preparing a meal that we know makes us feel really good, doing something, connecting with others. So all of these, strategies that we have that we know make us feel good are really important when we are noticing that we're becoming reactive as opposed to responsive with children. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this. And so really, this is one of my all-time favorite quotes, and it says, "One generation full of deeply loving parents would change the brain of the next generation, and with that, the world." And I really believe that as we are, in this process of laying the neurological networks in children who we're working with or we are raising or who are in our families we come in contact with, we're really able to embed, values like empathy and, caring, being kind, being helpful, but also having expectations and learning how to speak up for yourself. So all of these qualities are sort of really important, right? So the thing is that, we have all of these stressors that are coming in on us. This is life, and life is getting more and more complex. And just watch the news and you can see how disorienting it can be to see the pictures that we're seeing, not only of people lining up for food in a country that is, flush with enough food everywhere, where so many people are struggling with access to resources. It's disconcerting to see, buildings burning and people dying. So all of these news that we're hearing right now is definitely taking us out of that regular zone. So the more important it is now that we are finding a place to hold a balance for the children that are in our lives, because they really rely on us to help them as sort of their North Stars to orient themselves, right? So I have a daughter who, she had a speech delay and, is just very able to absorb information, to absorb what goes on around her, but the processing of that information is what she struggles with sometimes. So being able to verbalize what she feels when she takes in all that information at once, oftentimes with less filters, is really overwhelming. And so oftentimes it comes out in outrageous behaviors, right? Being totally silly or so whiny or something that may be going on. And so I know that as a parent, I am her North Star. She's like this. She orients herself on me, right? It's like when we go on an airplane and the plane hits turbulences, who do we look at? we look at the flight attendants. And if the flight attendant sits there as if everything is fine, it cools us down. And so this is what the adults do for children too. This doesn't mean that we're pretending there aren't any turbulences. It doesn't mean that we're pretending you can't get nauseous from that. We are recognizing all of this, but we're also able to hold a space for our children so that we help them stay oriented and have a sense of safety and connection, which is critical for their long-term health and well-being. And so these are the connections that we want to foster, and therefore we have to start with ourselves. This is going back to the airplane. The oxygen mask has to come on to ourselves first, right? Whether we're the parents or whether we're interacting with, anyone really, we cannot be effective if we're lacking a lot of oxygen. Okay, so now this is one of my favorite spots in Central Park, of course, and you might find this funny, but when I first came to the United States, and I'm from Germany originally, and I took a walk in Central Park, and I crossed strawberry fields, which I know that's what it's called now. I didn't know. I saw this mosaic, and I just thought, wow, what a great thing. They just put this imagine here. And yes, of course, I learned the history about this, and so this is a wonderful place. So I want to invite you, and I'm going to be quiet for a minute. I want to invite you to think about what are 3 qualities that you wish the children in your life, whether they're your own children, or they're your grandchildren, or they're your neighborhood children, or the children who frequent your library. What are 3 qualities that you hope they have when they grow up? And by qualities, I mean something like honesty or working hard. So I'm not going to give a lot more words because I really want to hear those from you. And please type them in the chat. 3 words, what you hope the qualities will be for the children in your life when they're grown up. So, and I'm going to zip up for a minute and let you write that in the chat, and I'll watch. Beautiful. Give it a moment. Wonderful. So I take it that you have been able to read many of these comments that came here, and I really appreciate you putting them in the chat. Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite exercises, to tell you the truth. I've been doing this for a number of years, and I am noticing a shift, and I'll tell you what the shift is. So when I first started this, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a lot of times the words that would come had much more to do with respect, hardworking, tough. And I'm not judging here at all. I'm just reporting to you a perspective on what I'm seeing. And today, and not just today, but what you're putting here is much more representative of what I've noticed over the last year or so, where the word resilience suddenly popped up. Kindness is a lot more represented. Empathy also popped up. So it's these words that really are like going deep in relationships and that are looking forward to connection. And I think it's so fascinating to view how these shifts, how these values are shifting. And it also makes me think about the different generations, because if you think about that quote we just looked at, and we go back to our parents and grandparents and wonder, what are some of the values that they hoped we would, or the qualities that they hoped we would develop and their grandchildren would develop? So it's very fascinating to see that, and encouraging too to notice how much of a desire there really is to build strong relationships and to recognize the value in these relationships. So yes, so as we're trying to instill these qualities in our children, which of course they're not born, with these, we learn these. There might be, characteristics or temperaments, personalities that make us more prone to have certain qualities, but really all of these qualities are learned. And we, as the quote-unquote disciplinarians, the teachers, right, the ones that the disciples follow, are the ones who are also going to teach these qualities and what we hope they will develop. So thinking back about the parenting styles we just talked about, right? So is a parent or an adult who is has a brick wall style, who just says, stop it, that's enough, you do it because I said so, is that child going to learn to be kind? Maybe, maybe not. With a parent who is very wishy-washy, jellyfish, is the child going to learn to be, strong? We don't know, maybe. So, but what we do know is that if we're staying within that zone and, around the circle of that backbone that you saw, if we're staying in that zone, that's where children feel safe and connected and where they're able to self-regulate. And that's also the zone where we're able to respond to our children as opposed to react to them. And as we're responding, we're much more likely to display qualities of kindness and happiness and being loving and all of that, right? And even if we have to hold a limit and we teach them strength and they are frustrated in that limit, and we'll get to that in a moment, then they also learn to be stronger or resilient, actually, because they learn that sometimes you have to go through some really big emotions and you come out on the other end and, you'll be fine. So I'll talk about the mechanisms that take place that lead to that next. So in that, I'm going to bend your mind a little. And what I want to talk about is the brain. And I know we talked about this already for a little bit, but I'm going to repeat this, especially if you are new to this webinar. So our brain can be divided into 3 different parts. And obviously, I'm not a neurologist. However, I am super fascinated by that, and I am trying to break down the bigger picture into a very simple picture. And this is the 3 parts that I'm talking about. So if we have the survival part of the brain, that represents the red part that you can see there, and the lower end of the red part is sort of, where the amygdala is housed. It's also called the smoke detector in the brain, and we'll come to that in a moment. But this is the part that is fully functioning when we're born. The rest of the brain is not fully functioning when we're born. And so that's where the neurological connections between the synapses have to take place, that then, starts to integrate all of these other parts of the brain and develop those parts fully. So I'm curious, in the chat, put in what age you think the brain is fully developed. You are all rock stars. Brain scientists there, perfect. Same thing, 7 years ago, everybody thought 5, 7, around that age. And no, now people recognize it's between the ages of 25 and 30, absolutely. So the brain is, and it continues to develop. Absolutely. We're finding that too. This whole thing that says you can't teach an old dog new tricks, it's wrong. It's because there's something called plasticity, and the brain can continue to develop and change and evolve even after trauma. And so this is some really good news. However, this shouldn't tell us, well, then it's not so important. No, imagine what we can build if we continue to build on this, healthy development with an understanding of what happens. So absolutely. So we're born with the stem part of the brain working, the survival part that regulates our heartbeat, blood pressure, body temperature, all those functions that are keeping us alive, right? And so then the next part of the brain that develops is the emotional part of the brain, and that part is, and obviously it doesn't go exactly in order all the time. It's an organic process. However, just for the sake of simplicity here and the time frame that we have, the limbic emotional part of the brain is that yellow part that then, begins to evolve and develop through the experiences that children have in how far their needs and feelings are responded to as they are developing, right? So a child that's, responded to in a manner, they're crying somewhere, and the parent, let's say, or caregivers in the middle of making dinner, and it's like, why? I just fed you and changed your diapers and enough already. You have to stop it now. That child might not feel taken seriously, or we don't know what the needs of the child are, but if we're not responding to that need, the emotional pattern that may be formed is different versus the pattern that is formed when we go, hey, what's the matter? Oh, you want me to hold you? Okay, I'll pick you up, right? So, and I am super simplifying that, but that's sort of where we're going. And then the higher part of the brain, the thinking part, or the control center, so to speak, that really sort of goes into its not final shape, but into the shape that very much directs how we respond to our world around us, how our patterns are. That's developed by, the age of, around 30, let's put it that way. That really is totally accessible for teenagers, of course, and, however, the patterns that are formed there are not as strong yet, so they are much more driven by the, emotional aspect. So, being a part of something or fitting in is really important at that time. So they're much more responsive to these emotions because that's the brain that is, further developed than these higher parts of the brain. Okay, and we'll come back to this. So if I were to ask you here, which of these two pictures do you think represents the stressed brain? Please say left or right in the chat. Yeah, so we have, this is what oftentimes we think. So the left brain is like, woo, all red, totally. Where in fact, if we go back to the image before, right? So if you're thinking about a stressed brain, it means that the lower part of the brain, the red part of the brain, is the part that is mostly active, which means that the rest of the brain is not flooded with blood anymore. So the right brain here is the stress brain. It shows that the only part that is flooded with blood, meaning it's active, is the survival part of the brain. So you see how impactful a stressful experience is. And so when we're talking about stress, obviously I'm not talking about healthy stress here or normal stress. I'm talking about stress that puts us into survival mode. So that's basically where we can see that there's a long-term impact. If that is the case, if you were to see this picture here before as a sort of a triangle, right? Or you think about how often does the red part of the brain get stimulated for a child, and it's stimulated a lot, you would see that the size of that brain is bigger than the size of the red and the yellow and the green, the limbic and the neofrontal cortex is, right? You would see that those parts of the brain are smaller than the survival part of the brain. So if you were to think about it as in a triangle, you would have an upside down triangle. Right? So, and that's really what we want an upside down triangle, but you would have a triangle that is, big at the bottom with a big survival part of the brain. And that's what we really want to avoid, because that is a recipe for long-term health issues, physical, emotional, mental, and we really want to get to the point that we can have access to the higher parts of our brain as much as possible. So how do we do this? We're forming these patterns. I always like to refer to this, it's like tracks in the snow. And we all have patterns as adults, right, that were shaped in our own lives. So if we've had a lot of stress or specific experiences that basically shaped our belief system to think, let's say you had a brick wall parent, and you might develop a belief like, it doesn't matter what I say, I'm never going to be enough. Or you might think that I can never get it right because my parent always flips. Or you might feel really dissatisfied because who cares? Who cares about me if you had a really permissive parent? So those are the patterns that we're also meeting children with in our adult life. And when we recognize these patterns, then we can shift them. It becomes very difficult to change the outcome or our experiences of interactions when we are not aware of the patterns that we have ourselves. So this is why I oftentimes encourage, and if we had more time, we would do some exercises, but mindfulness and personal inquiry and reflection are really wonderful practices for us to sort of get behind our own patterns, to observe them, not to judge them. That's not the goal. It's to recognize them. So, as a parent, for example, I found out I didn't know this. I think I'm a pretty easygoing person. I rarely raise my voice. I don't get annoyed very quickly. I don't get mad. I think I have a pretty tolerant, high tolerance for certain things, maybe not as much as I'm getting older. And I'm sure some of you can relate with me. But, I definitely would see myself still as an easygoing person. And then I had 3 children whom I wanted and loved. Now, why was I yelling like crazy at them? I had no idea. And so in this whole process of inquiry, I understood where these patterns were coming from. And so in order to change them, in order to basically see that train coming behind me that is taking me on that track that you can see in front of you, that basically says, here's the yelling train, jump on, and you go down that road. So that's not going to work if I'm not aware of it. But if I can start to see that, I can say, nope, not coming on the ride this time. I'm taking an alternative route. And it may take a lot of work to pave that new route. Either you have to stomp through the deep snow or you have to shovel your way, But the thing is, the more you go that way, the more deeper the patterns get. So yes, I hear the question, how do you change learned behavior? Recognizing where the behavior pattern comes from is the first part. And there are, practices I can recommend a book. I know it's in your libraries. It's called Mindsight by Dr. Daniel Siegel. He talks about, and he has wonderful exercises in his book, how you can recognize your own patterns. Of course, therapy too. Therapy is not just when you're in crisis. Therapy helps us, or having any kind of conversation groups where we're able to put the puzzle pieces together, where we're able to make sense of certain situations. And I want to stress here, this is not about blaming our parents. Yes, maybe we might discover things that they did that were really harmful to us. And we can be mad about that and everything, but it's not about blaming it. We know they did the best with what they did the best with what they could do in a sense like that. However, understanding that's why I respond in that way is really helpful, because then I can say, when this happens, I don't want to respond like that. And we have to think about these situations outside of the trigger situations, right? So if you're in the middle of being completely triggered, like your survival part is taking over, you don't have access to that higher part of the brain. That's why you need to calm yourself down. You need to have strategies to get yourself to the point, or you have to calm yourself up. Maybe you have to move because you're depressed. You have to do something, to get your juices flowing, so to speak, your mojo on. You have to do something, to get you back into that zone where you have access to the higher part of the brain so that you can really think about it. And think about what is an alternative route that you could take, right? You could look at the map of your usual situations. What is something that keeps reoccurring? How does that, affect X, Y, and Z? And so these are the points where you then consciously decide, next time this happens, you make a plan. Next time this happens, I am going to take an alternative road. I'm going to leave the room. I'm going to ask for help. I am going to wash my hands. When you're in the middle with small children like I was, for example, I touched my earlobes. I knew that touching my earlobes would be a reminder for me that, okay, be aware, right? So you can do this in the middle of an argument and no one notices. And it helps you not to engage in the same patterns. Okay, so this is a long topic. Forgive me, I'm going to go on. There's so much more to be said about it, is what I'm saying. But I'm going to go on, and hopefully these steps that I will talk about in the next 15 minutes will help us to identify this. So this is what is called the PEACE process. And so PEACE stands for acronyms that I will go over with you in detail. And these were developed by the Jai Institute for Parenting, which is where I got my parenting coach certificate. Not my credential, that's a different body, but okay. So the first step in the PEACE process, let's say you are in a situation where you have a child that is really active in their yellow part of the brain, so the emotions are high, right? And it might even be a meltdown. So it's between somewhere, the amygdala, that smoke detector has been alarmed, because basically what happened is that feelings got really big, right? If you think about the brain, here's the stem part. This thumb here is going to represent the yellow part of the brain, and the higher part is the limbic part, the neocortex, the frontal lobes, right? So what happened is that the feelings got really stimulated in the child, and so now the smoke detector is saying, like, wait a minute, I can see this part of the brain, the middle part is suddenly getting active. So blood flows away from the higher part of the brain into the limbic part, and now maybe the smoke detector is saying, wait a minute, are we in danger? I mean, could something really be happening to us here? And so what we see is we have a flipped lid, and the survival part takes over, and that's basically the situation, right? So you have a situation like that with the child, and so you get to a point where you ask, where you have this PEACE process in front of you. And so the first step that you want to take, and this could be in any crisis really, is right, that you pay attention. So you're paying attention, and paying attention meaning you're taking a curious look at what is going on. And a curious look means you're non-judgmental. You're like a detective. You are just taking the facts down, or you're collecting information in a manner that goes, okay. No other judgment about, oh my God, why is this happening? You're just curious and asking, I wonder, what are all the factors that are connected to this incident? So I'm going to take the example, you're picking up a toddler from school and they're crying, melting down. Or a child comes home from school melting down, right? And so you can say, what happened? Okay, I got into, the daycare. I walked in. I saw there was a lot of noise going on. And the teacher said the child didn't eat their food. Same thing, your child might come home, they're sweaty or, whatever in a certain stage. Things are falling out of the backpack and, you're just taking those pictures in. You're just taking in. Aha. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you're paying attention, then as you're taking in everything that happens, now the E stands for every child's feelings and needs. And this is the point where you are thinking about what might the child be feeling or needing right now. So, and feeling and needing is not a language that is very developed yet. It is a lot more developed than 7 years ago, as I said to you, that transition of what is coming on. But this is, really we're becoming more aware. We talk about social and emotional learning. So this is also in that same realm, growth mindset when we're talking about those aspects. So taking a stock of what might the child be feeling or needing right now. So, could they be hungry? Was it a really long day, or did they go to bed at night? So might they be tired? And this is all what you're able to discern because you paid attention to everything else that was going on, right? So you're noticing, are they going, tired, hungry? They've been away from you for a long time, or have you been on the phone the whole time since they got home, or, distracted otherwise? Do they need connection? Okay, and so now you're identifying, they're probably tired, hungry, and they need connection because feelings rarely ever come in singles. And so now you can say like, oh, I'm so tired myself, and I had a late night, and I have so much work to do, or I'm just not feeling it today, or this whining gets really under my skin. And so what happens is oftentimes when we have these first sensations, the pattern is that we react. Now our patterns kick in and they say, enough is enough, stop it already, or, okay, then we turn permissive. Here, have a lollipop, right? So we bribe the kids for all kinds of things. So here is where we want to not do anything, but allow for self-empathy, right? So we want to say, yes, this sucks. This part about parenting really sucks. Or this part about working with children, I never thought that I could do that. Or I thought it would be so different. You can allow yourself to have all kinds of thoughts as long as they stay in your head, right? You don't want to spill them all out. You might be able to say some things, with a filter like, I'm so tired too. Because what you're doing in that moment is you're modeling, and just to see your self-empathy, so long as you're not putting the blame on the child. But, you can say out loud some of the things. And then what you do is you care with empathy. Then you have this thing, once you've given yourself empathy and you can say, I'm so tired, but I'm going to do this because I love my child, or I love to work with children and I really want to respond to them, and they can hear it. And then you can say, right, so you're really caring with empathy, and you can say, I wonder, are you hungry or tired, or do you need a hug? Haven't you spoken to someone? Okay, and here is where the next step comes, and this is critical. Even though once you've done this process a lot of times, oftentimes you don't need to go through all of these processes, but then what you're doing is you're exploring solutions together. And what you're doing in exploring these solutions together is that you're saying, I wonder, are you really hungry? What do you think we should do? Should I make you something to eat? You may be suggesting, but you're also inviting the child to contribute to the solution. Say they had a fight with a sibling, or a fight at school, or they're discontent about something, or they're having a meltdown because they can't find a book, or they don't want to sit down and read something, or, whatever might be going on. But here you can invite them in to contribute to the solution. And this is really important because here we have allowed the children to have the big feelings. We are taking them seriously and they get a voice. And we are helping them. We're there as the adult who can help them meet their needs in a constructive way, right? And so those steps are really critical in developing a relationship with our children. And I'll just tell you my last little story here, and then I'll open it up for questions. But when my middle daughter, who I mentioned before, was, I don't know, 4, or maybe she was 5, she was still struggling verbalizing herself. And so she had this phase that she was going through where she would just go destroy all of her siblings, things that they built, and then she would just move away and, go in a corner somewhere and go, meh, meh, and make terrible noises. And so, of course, I thought, oh my God, my child, she'll never make it into college with that kind of behavior, right? And so here comes the yelling train, or the train that stops all of this. But here's where I, practice this. Okay, so pay attention what went on. Okay, she went to her siblings, they were playing, and she just walked over and destroyed everything they just built. Okay, what happened before? Okay, the siblings were playing together before too, and she wasn't there, right? So then that's the paying attention. So what might she be feeling? Maybe she feels excluded. Maybe she wants to be a part and she doesn't feel she knows how to say, I want to play with you too. Okay, so allowing for self-empathy. I don't know if I can do this. This is terrible. And, I didn't sign up for being this coach with them the whole time. And so then I can find that empathy for myself, and then I care with empathy, and I can say, I can say something. And so in her case, she wasn't very verbal. So I just sat on the ground on the other side of the table, on the other side of the room, and I kind of emulated the sounds that she was making. And, in under a minute, she crawled on my lap, she fell around my neck, and, I was able to just rock her and then say, you would really like to play with them, huh? And she got up and said, yes. And so I said, what can we do? And, we went over and she was able to integrate them. We could talk about it. But these are all skills that kids don't come with. They have to develop these. And so this peace process really helps do so in a manner that is, that stimulates the kind of development that we want to see in our children. But now I want to open it for question because I know we're almost at the top of the hour and I want to give some room for input. You can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself if Joanna will allow, and then I can hear you.
Okay, so everyone has the option to unmute yourselves now if you would like to ask your question out loud. There was a request in the chat for you to repeat the book you had mentioned. I think it was on recognizing behavior.
Yes, the book is called Mindsight. It's one word. And it is by Dr. Daniel Siegel. He wrote a bunch of books that are really wonderful, and I know that your library system has them because that's where I read them all. Any other questions?
One question is, do you have any specific ways for self-compassion/empathy in the heat of the moment? How do you manage your own response?
Yes, so absolutely. So the first thing is to basically think, so one thing that really helps is sort of step outside yourself and see when something goes on that is, just watch yourself, like what is happening. And the key is that we don't want to judge ourselves in that moment. So not to judge ourselves, but to, even you might be able to say it out loud, something like, I'm feeling so angry and so mad. And by hearing yourself saying those feelings or in the heat of the moment, you can recognize it. And trust me, a lot of this is very messy. It doesn't look pretty or is not a clean process. That's absolutely not what it is. I can tell you that from my own experience. But I can also tell you from my own experience that when you watch yourself and you catch yourself, and the more often you are able to reflect to yourself back what is going on, the more you are able to shift those patterns. And so here's one thing that is really helpful. So every time you wash your hands, right now you do that a lot, or you go to the bathroom, something you do on a regular basis, right? Or you drink coffee or you wash the dishes, you pick your own thing. Ask yourself the question, what am I feeling right now? And by asking yourself, what are you feeling right now, you're beginning, without judgment, then say, okay, I feel happy, or I feel sad, stressed, and you might feel limited in delineating your feelings. So I encourage you, go online and look up lists of feelings, and you will, or emotional vocabulary, and you will find tons of lists, and you can just check on a list, literally check how you feel every now and then, but on a regular basis. This way you get to know yourself more. You get to be your own detective, your own little scientist about yourself, and figuring out what you're feeling, because these feelings are your key messengers to where you're going, telling you about your state. You can say, I'm feeling so mad, and you might realize that you're not feeling at your children. I see you're parenting while webinaring. So you might not feel stressed because of your children's behavior, but you might feel stressed because you had an argument with your partner last night, or you have to go food shopping, you only have this little window, right? Or because the house is a chaos even though you just cleaned up. Right, so this has nothing to do with your child per se or their behavior, but it really has to do with how you're feeling. And then you can go better to problem solving. But the first thing is really recognizing our own feelings first and naming them in order to see what the patterns are. That's a short answer, I know, but any other questions?
Remember, if you would like to ask a question out loud, you do have the option to unmute yourself. I think that might be it.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Julika for giving us this presentation. Again, this was recorded, and when it is ready, it will go up on the Professional Development LibGuide. Julika's contact information is on the screen, so if you think of a question as soon as you hang up, which always happens, please feel free to contact her. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and all the best to everybody here.